It was a crisp autumn morning at LaGuardia Airport, and the bustling terminal was filled with the usual mix of hurried travelers and rolling suitcases. Among them walked a distinguished-looking man in his early 40s, wearing a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But he carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from building something from nothing, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. As he approached the first-class counter, his Italian leather shoes making soft clicks against the polished floor, he could already feel the familiar weight of eyes on him. He'd felt these stares throughout his journey from startup founder to tech billionaire. The same stares that followed him in high-end stores and exclusive restaurants, the ones that seemed to ask, does he really belong here? The first-class counter was being managed by a gate agent who couldn't have been more than 30, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform pressed to perfection. As the tech mogul approached with his carry-on luggage, her smile flickered, just for a moment, before settling into a practiced customer service expression. "Good morning," he said, sliding his first-class ticket and ID across the counter. His voice carried the warmth and authority of someone used to commanding boardrooms, yet remained unfailingly polite. The gate agent's fingers hesitated over his documents. She picked up his ID, then the ticket, then the ID again. Her eyes darted between the documents and his face, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that shouldn't exist. "I'm sorry, sir," she began, her voice taking on that special tone customer service representatives use when they're about to deliver bad news. "It seems we're having some system issues with your booking." He nodded patiently, having played this scene before. Through the corner of his eye, he noticed two other passengers, both white, approach the adjacent counter. They were quickly processed and sent on their way with bright smiles and cheerful, "Have a great flight" wishes. Meanwhile, the gate agent was typing frantically into her computer, making small sounds of disapproval. "It's showing some inconsistencies," she muttered, though she couldn't seem to point out exactly what these inconsistencies were. She called over a colleague, and they began whispering while shooting glances in his direction. What they didn't know was that the man standing before them had just closed a $500 million deal the previous day. That the watch on his wrist could probably pay for their annual salary. That he'd flown first class on this very airline over 50 times in the past year alone. But he stood there, calm and collected, his expression neutral. He'd learned long ago that showing anger in these situations only reinforced their prejudices. Instead, he pulled out his phone and checked his emails, occasionally glancing up to see the growing discomfort on the gate agent's face as she ran out of excuses. Other passengers were starting to notice the scene. Some were openly staring, others pretending not to watch while clearly paying attention to every word. A few had their phones out, perhaps sensing that something newsworthy was unfolding. The tech billionaire checked his watch. 15 minutes had passed since he'd first presented his documents. In the world of airport check-ins, 15 minutes might as well be an eternity. He could see his fellow first-class passengers already lining up for boarding, while he stood there, supposedly dealing with mysterious system issues. He took a deep breath, straightened his already straight tie, and prepared to do something he had hoped wouldn't be necessary. Sometimes, he reflected, the only way to change the system was to make it uncomfortable for those who perpetuated it. Even if that meant drawing attention to himself, something he typically preferred to avoid. The tech billionaire cleared his throat softly and spoke in a measured tone that carried just enough weight to make the gate agent look up from her frantic typing. "I'd appreciate if you could explain exactly what these system issues are," he said. The way he spoke made it clear he was used to getting straight answers, but there was no aggression in his voice, just calm authority. "Well, sir," the gate agent stumbled over her words, "the system is showing some irregularities with your booking." She glanced nervously at her colleague, who was pretending to be busy with paperwork. "We need to verify some things before we can issue your boarding pass." Right then, a well-dressed elderly couple walked up to the counter next to them. Within minutes, they were checked in and headed to the gate, their first-class boarding passes in hand. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious, and several onlookers started shaking their heads in disapproval. A young woman in the growing crowd pulled out her phone and started recording. "This isn't right," she whispered to her friend, loud enough for others to hear. The tech billionaire noticed, but kept his attention focused on the gate agent, who was becoming increasingly flustered. "I've flown with your airline 57 times this year alone," he stated quietly, pulling out his platinum frequent flyer card. The sunlight catching its metallic surface seemed to make the gate agent's eyes widen. "I would hope that qualifies as a verified customer." The gate agent's fingers froze over her keyboard. Her colleague, who had been avoiding eye contact, suddenly looked up with recognition dawning on her face. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, a bit too loudly. "Aren't you the CEO who just acquired?" The first gate agent's face went from flushed to pale in seconds. She quickly grabbed her supervisor's phone extension, her hands shaking slightly as she dialed. The crowd watching the scene unfold had grown larger, and whispers were spreading like wildfire through the terminal. "Did you hear who that is? Isn't he the one from the Forbes cover? The tech guy worth billions? They're really going to regret this." The tech billionaire remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. He'd been in this situation before, though usually it didn't play out quite so publicly. He watched as people pulled out their phones, no doubt checking their news feeds and social media to confirm his identity. A young business traveler nearby was showing his phone to others, pointing to an article about a recent major tech acquisition. The photos matched the man standing at the counter perfectly. The same distinguished gray at his temples, the same confident but approachable demeanor that had made him a favorite in the business press. The supervisor appeared within minutes, practically running to the counter. She was already apologizing before she reached them, her face showing the kind of panic that comes with realizing your company might have just made a massive PR mistake. "Sir, I am so incredibly sorry for this misunderstanding," she said, emphasizing each word. "Please, let me handle your check-in personally. We'll have you on board right away." But the tech billionaire didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his own phone and opened the Notes app. "Before we proceed," he said calmly, "I'd like to document exactly what's happened here in the last 20 minutes. His voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the politeness now. The crowd had grown even larger. Some people were nodding in approval, others were still recording, and a few were already posting on social media. The supervisor's face showed she understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't just about one check-in gone wrong anymore. This was about to become a much bigger story. The tech billionaire looked around at the gathered crowd, then back at the airline staff. He hadn't wanted to make a scene, but sometimes these moments chose you. And maybe, just maybe, this was one of those times when being quiet wasn't the right answer. The supervisor's hands were shaking slightly as she tried to take control of the situation. "Sir, please, if we could just move this conversation somewhere more private," she suggested, gesturing toward a nearby customer service office. But the tech billionaire stood his ground, his expression calm but determined. "I think we're fine right here," he replied softly, still typing notes into his phone. After all, this situation began in public, didn't it? His words weren't angry, but they carried weight. The growing crowd of onlookers murmured in agreement. A middle-aged woman in the crowd spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've been watching this whole thing. They processed 5 other first-class passengers while making him wait. 5. Others nodded, and more phones came out to record the scene. The original gate agent was now sitting in her chair, looking like she wanted to disappear. Her face had gone from pale to slightly green as she realized the magnitude of what was unfolding. The supervisor kept glancing nervously between her staff member, the growing crowd, and the calm billionaire who was methodically documenting everything. 23 minutes, the tech billionaire said, checking his watch. "That's how long I've been standing here trying to board a flight I've taken dozens of times before." He looked directly at the supervisor. Would you like to explain why? The supervisor struggled to find words. Sir, there must have been a technical issue that only affected my ticket. He interrupted, his voice still steady. A technical issue that somehow didn't apply to any other first-class passenger. He gestured to the counter where people were still being processed smoothly at the other stations. Just then, someone in the crowd gasped. Oh my God! Look! They were pointing at their phone screen. The first social media posts about the incident were already going viral. Someone had recognized him and shared a link to his company's recent $3.2 billion acquisition announcement. The story was spreading like wildfire. The supervisor's phone started buzzing in her pocket, probably the first of many calls from higher up. She pulled it out, glanced at it, and her face fell even further. Sir, our regional director is on his way down personally to address this situation. The tech billionaire nodded slowly. Good, because this isn't just about me anymore. He turned to address the crowd directly for the first time. This happens every day to people who don't have billions in their bank accounts. People who can't make headlines by being denied service. A young business student in the crowd was practically bouncing with excitement. Your company just launched that diversity in tech initiative, right? The one with the $50 million fund for minority entrepreneurs. The supervisor's face went from worried to terrified. Her airline had just discriminated against one of the most prominent advocates for diversity in the business world. The irony would not be lost on the public. Sir, she tried again, her voice nearly a whisper now. We can offer you an immediate upgrade to first class on any flight of your choosing, complimentary. The tech billionaire held up his hand. I don't want upgrades, he said firmly. What I want is accountability. He turned his phone screen toward her, showing a draft email addressed to his company's legal team. And maybe some real change. The crowd had grown so large that airport security had to come and create a path for other passengers to get through. But they didn't try to disperse the onlookers. Even they seemed to understand that something important was happening here. More airline staff were arriving now, all looking nervous and speaking into phones. The regional director was apparently minutes away, but the tech billionaire seemed in no hurry anymore. He'd been forced to wait nearly half an hour. Now it was their turn to wait while he finished documenting every detail of what had happened. He looked at his watch one more time, then back at the gathering crowd of supporters and witnesses. Sometimes, he thought, the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger. It's careful, methodical documentation followed by purposeful action. And he had a feeling this documentation was about to lead to some very interesting meetings in the airline's corporate offices. The atmosphere in the terminal shifted dramatically as a sharply dressed man rushed through the crowd. The regional director had finally arrived. His crisp suit and confident stride faltered slightly when he saw the size of the gathered crowd and recognized the tech billionaire standing calmly at the counter. I came as soon as I heard, the regional director said, slightly out of breath. Sir, I cannot express how deeply sorry we are for this unfortunate situation. He glanced nervously at the phones still recording everything. A young woman in the crowd suddenly spoke up. Oh my gosh, my post about this just hit 10,000 shares. She turned her phone screen toward her friend. People are going crazy about this online. It's everywhere. The tech billionaire simply nodded, still typing on his phone. You know what's interesting? He said, looking up at the regional director. I was just reading through my company's travel records. Your airline has received over $15 million in business from us this year alone. The regional director's face went pale. Behind him, the supervisor looked like she might faint. The original gate agent had long since been whisked away to another area, but the damage was already done. Our corporate partnership has always been valuable to us. The regional director started, but the tech billionaire raised his hand to stop him. Let me share something with you, he said, his voice carrying easily through the now hushed terminal. This morning, Before I came to the airport, I was reviewing applications for our new tech mentorship program. Young people from all walks of life, dreaming of making it in this industry. He paused, letting his words sink in. What message does it send when someone who's made it still gets treated this way? The crowd murmured in agreement. An elderly gentleman near the front spoke up. I've been flying for 40 years, and I've seen this too many times. But never so publicly, and never with someone who could actually do something about it. Social media was exploding. Someone in the crowd announced that hashtag flying while billionaire was trending nationwide. Others were sharing that major news outlets had already picked up the story. The regional director's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Sir, the regional director tried again. If we could discuss this in private? We want to make this right. The tech billionaire looked thoughtful for a moment. Make it right. Okay, let's talk about that. He pulled up another document on his phone. I've been working on a proposal for corporate diversity training programs. I wasn't planning to launch it today, but sometimes opportunities present themselves. A businesswoman in the crowd gasped in recognition. Wait, isn't your company the one that just launched that revolutionary AI bias detection software? The regional director's eyes widened. He knew exactly who he was dealing with now, not just a wealthy passenger, but someone whose entire business was built around identifying and eliminating systemic bias in technology. The irony was almost painful. Here's what's going to happen, the tech billionaire said calmly. I'm still going to board this flight. But when I land, I expect to have a meeting scheduled with your CEO. Not about compensating me, but about implementing real changes. He turned to address the crowd directly. Because while this story might make headlines because of who I am, the real story is about everyone who experiences this treatment and can't make headlines. The crowd erupted in applause. A young airport employee who had been watching everything unfold whispered to her colleague, I've never seen anything like this. He turned discrimination into an opportunity for actual change. The regional director was already on his phone, presumably trying to arrange the requested meeting. The supervisor was personally printing the boarding pass that should have been issued 30 minutes ago. And through it all, the tech billionaire maintained his composed demeanor, though there was now a hint of satisfaction in his expression. He knew that what started as a routine case of discrimination was about to become a masterclass in turning prejudice into progress. The viral posts, news coverage, and public support were all tools he could use to force real institutional change. Sometimes, he thought, the best revenge isn't anger. It's excellence coupled with action. The mood in the terminal had transformed completely. The same airline staff who had been making excuses about system issues were now falling over themselves to assist. The supervisor was personally escorting the tech billionaire to the first-class lounge, while the regional director walked alongside, still trying to smooth things over. We'll upgrade you to our premium suite on the aircraft, the regional director offered, his voice hopeful. It's the least we can do to make up for this unfortunate incident. The tech billionaire stopped walking and turned to face him. You still don't get it, do you? He said quietly. I don't want special treatment now that you know who I am. I want regular treatment for everyone, regardless of who they are. A group of passengers waiting at a nearby gate had their phones out, still recording. One of them called out, My daughter works in tech. You're her hero, sir. She's going to flip when I tell her about this. The tech billionaire acknowledged them with a small wave, then turned back to the regional director. Let me show you something. He pulled out his tablet and opened his email. In the last 30 minutes, I've received over 200 messages. Want to guess what they're about? The regional director swallowed hard as the tech billionaire continued. They're from people sharing their own stories of discrimination at airports. Business people, doctors, lawyers, accomplished professionals who get treated like suspects just because of how they look. Just then, the airline's PR team arrived, looking flustered and carrying tablets showing the growing social media storm. The hashtag was now trending globally, and major news networks were picking up the story. "Sir," one of the PR representatives started, "we've prepared a statement about how valued you are as a customer." "Stop right there," the tech billionaire interrupted firmly. "I'm not interested in statements about how valued I am. I'm interested in actions that show how valued every customer is." He pulled up another email on his tablet. "Look at this one. A neurosurgeon who gets randomly selected for additional screening every single time she flies." Or this one. "A federal judge who was questioned about his first-class ticket last week." The PR team exchanged nervous glances. The story was quickly becoming bigger than just one incident with one passenger, even if that passenger was a billionaire. A young boy, probably around 12, had been watching everything unfold with his mother. He tugged on the tech billionaire's sleeve. "My dad says you build computers that help people be fair. Is that true?" The tech billionaire's stern expression softened as he knelt down to the boy's level. "That's exactly what we try to do," he said. "Because sometimes people need help remembering that everyone deserves to be treated with respect." Standing back up, he addressed the airline officials. "Here's what's going to happen next. I'm going to board my flight, but not before I have written confirmation of a meeting with your CEO tomorrow. And I'm bringing data, lots of it." He held up his phone, showing hundreds of incoming messages. "Each of these stories is a reason for change. Each person who's ever been humiliated at an airport because they didn't look right is a reason for change." The PR team was frantically taking notes while the regional director made calls. In the background, more passengers were sharing their own stories of similar experiences, creating a ripple effect of revelation through the terminal. "Your company has two choices," the tech billionaire continued. "You can try to weather this PR storm with apologetic statements and special treatments, or you can work with me to create real, lasting change in how airports handle bias." An elderly woman who had been quietly watching spoke up. "In all my years of flying, I've never seen someone turn discrimination into opportunity quite like this. You're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for all of us." The tech billionaire checked his watch again. His flight would be boarding soon. But he knew the real journey was just beginning. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of injustice, and he was about to turn this moment into a movement. As boarding time approached, the tech billionaire pulled out his phone one more time, but not to check emails or social media. Instead, he opened his camera and started recording. "I want to document this properly," he said, his voice clear and professional. "For the record, could you state your name and position?" he asked the regional director. The regional director shifted uncomfortably but complied, aware that dozens of other phones were still recording the scene. The PR team exchanged worried glances. This wasn't going to be a simple problem they could solve with a press release and some free flights. "I think it's important to be thorough," the tech billionaire explained. His tone remained professional but firm. "When we meet with your CEO tomorrow, I want to present more than just my word against yours. I want to show the whole story." A flight attendant who had been watching everything unfold stepped forward bravely. "Sir," she said, her voice slightly shaky but determined, "I've worked here for 15 years, and I've seen this kind of thing happen too many times. But we're afraid to speak up because we need our jobs." The tech billionaire turned to her with genuine interest. "Would you be willing to share your experiences?" "Anonymously, of course." She nodded, and several other airline staff members stepped forward as well, ready to contribute their stories. Meanwhile, the crowd had thinned somewhat, but those who remained were deeply invested in the unfolding events. A business professor from a nearby university had been taking notes. "This is going to be a case study in my ethics class," he announced. "How to transform discrimination into institutional change." The PR team was now huddled in a corner, frantically discussing strategy. One of them approached with a document. "Sir, we've drafted an official apology statement. Would you like to review it?" The tech billionaire barely glanced at the paper. An apology without action is just words, he said. Instead, show me what you're planning to do differently tomorrow, next week, next month. Just then, his phone buzzed with a message. The airline's CEO had agreed to a meeting first thing tomorrow morning. But there was more. The CEO was actually flying in tonight specifically for this meeting. The regional director looked both relieved and terrified at this news. A young flight attendant trainee who had been watching everything spoke up. "You know what's amazing? You never raised your voice, never lost your cool. You're teaching us how to fight injustice with dignity." The tech billionaire smiled slightly. "Sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest impact," he responded. "Change doesn't always need shouting. It needs strategy, documentation, and persistence." As the boarding time drew closer, he turned to address the remaining crowd one last time. "Today started with discrimination, but it's going to end with transformation. Your support, your videos, your shared stories, they're all part of making this change happen." The gate agent called for first-class boarding, and this time, there was no question about his ticket. But before heading to the gate, he handed his business card to the flight attendant who had spoken up earlier. "Have everyone with a story to tell email me directly," he said. "Every voice matters in this conversation." A teenage girl who had been recording everything on her phone called out, "My mom says your company is worth billions, but you just spent an hour fighting for regular people. That's real richness." The tech billionaire paused at her comment. "Money can build companies," he said thoughtfully, "but it takes courage to build change. And sometimes, change starts with simply standing your ground when someone tells you that you don't belong." As he finally headed toward the gate, the regional director trailing behind him with upgraded boarding passes and apologies, a ripple of applause spread through the terminal. But the tech billionaire knew this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. He had turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for change, and tomorrow's meeting would be just the first step. Sometimes life's worst moments become platforms for its greatest transformations. Within hours of the incident, the story had exploded across social media and news outlets. The tech billionaire sat in his first-class seat, watching as his phone lit up with notifications. Major news networks were running the story, and his company's PR team was being flooded with interview requests. "Sir, would you like to see the news coverage?" asked a flight attendant, offering him a tablet with live TV. He accepted it with a polite nod and watched as various channels played clips recorded by passengers at the airport. The headlines were everywhere. Tech billionaire denied boarding. A turning point for air travel. Discrimination at 30,000 feet. Industry leader takes stand. Viral airport incident sparks national conversation. A middle-aged passenger across the aisle leaned over. "My wife just texted me about this. She says our daughter's whole computer science class is talking about you. They're calling you the quiet revolutionary." The tech billionaire smiled slightly at that. He opened his laptop and began reviewing the hundreds of messages pouring in. They weren't just messages of support. People were sharing their own stories, offering to testify about similar experiences, and asking how they could help create change. "The airline stock is down 4% already," whispered another passenger, showing him their phone screen. But the tech billionaire wasn't interested in hurting the company. He was focused on transforming it. He started drafting notes for tomorrow's meeting with the CEO. This wasn't about demanding apologies or seeking compensation. This was about creating lasting change. He outlined several key points. A flight attendant who had heard about the incident came by his seat. "Sir," she said quietly, "I just want you to know that many of us have wanted to speak up about these issues for years. You're giving us a voice." Just then, his phone buzzed with a message from his company's board of directors. They were unanimously backing his decision to leverage this incident for industry-wide change. The message included approval for a $50 million fund to support diversity initiatives in the transportation sector. Another passenger stopped by his seat on the way to the bathroom. "My brother flies every week for work," the man said. "He's a successful surgeon, but he gets randomly selected for screening every single time. Thank you for standing up for all of us." The tech billionaire nodded thoughtfully. He pulled up the email from the airline CEO again. The meeting was set for 8 a.m. tomorrow, and executives from other major airlines were asking to join. What started as one incident of discrimination was quickly becoming a catalyst for industry-wide reform. A young flight attendant trainee approached with tears in her eyes. "I just got a message from my supervisor," she said. "They're already scheduling emergency bias training sessions for all staff. Your stand is already making changes." He looked out the window at the clouds below, thinking about how one morning's discrimination had turned into an opportunity for transformation. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from a major civil rights organization offering to partner on the initiative. The flight's captain came on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting our descent. Please return to your seats." But before the announcement ended, the captain added something unusual. "And sir, in seat 2A, thank you for helping us become better." Several passengers wiped away tears at the captain's words. The tech billionaire remained composed, but inside, he felt a deep sense of purpose. Sometimes, the worst moments become the most powerful catalysts for change. As the plane descended, he finalized his notes for tomorrow's meeting. This wasn't just about one incident or one airline anymore. This was about changing an entire industry's culture. His phone had already filled with more messages: civil rights lawyers offering support, industry leaders pledging solidarity, and ordinary people sharing their hopes for change. The plane touched down, but this journey was far from over. Tomorrow's meeting would be just the beginning of a much longer flight toward justice. The next morning, the airline's corporate headquarters was buzzing with unusual energy. The CEO had arrived hours early, along with the entire executive team. The lobby was filled with news crews hoping to catch a glimpse of the tech billionaire who had turned one incident into a national conversation about change. Right at 8 a.m., the tech billionaire walked in, carrying just his laptop and a small notebook. No lawyers, no entourage, just him and the data he collected over the past 24 hours. The receptionist immediately recognized him and stood up, hands slightly shaking as she reached for the phone. "Sir, they're waiting for you in the main conference room," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Everyone's here: the CEO, the board members, and executives from 3 other major airlines." As he walked through the office, employees stopped to watch. Many had seen the videos, read the stories, and some had even shared their own experiences anonymously overnight. A young intern whispered to her colleague, "He didn't just fight for himself. He's fighting for all of us." The conference room door opened to reveal a packed room. The airline's CEO immediately stood up and walked over to greet him. "Thank you for coming," the CEO said, extending his hand. "We've been here since dawn, reviewing everything." The tech billionaire took his seat and opened his laptop. "Before we begin," he said calmly, "I want to share something with you." He turned the screen around, showing an inbox with over 10,000 new messages. "These are stories from your passengers, your employees, and people across the industry. Each one represents a voice that hasn't been heard." A board member spoke up. "We've prepared a comprehensive compensation package." "I'm going to stop you right there," the tech billionaire interrupted politely. "I'm not here for compensation. I'm here to show you an opportunity." He pulled up a presentation on the main screen. "Last night, my team and I worked on this," he continued. "We're calling it the Aviation Equality Initiative." The room fell silent as he began explaining his vision. The plan was comprehensive. Mandatory bias training using cutting-edge virtual reality technology, anonymous reporting systems for both passengers and employees, regular audits of customer service interactions, and a $100 million joint fund for implementing these changes across the industry. "But here's the most important part," he said, clicking to the next slide. "We're not just going to train people to be better. We're going to give them the tools to do better." He revealed his company's latest AI technology, designed to detect and prevent bias in customer service interactions in real time. The CEO leaned forward, clearly interested. "This is more than just a response to yesterday's incident." "Exactly," the tech billionaire replied. "Yesterday wasn't just about me being denied boarding. It was about every person who's ever been made to feel they don't belong somewhere because of how they look." An executive from another airline raised her hand. "The cost of implementing all this will be nothing compared to the cost of not implementing it," the tech billionaire finished. "My company is prepared to match every dollar your airlines invest in this initiative." The room buzzed with excitement. This wasn't the confrontational meeting they'd expected. Instead, it was an opportunity to transform an entire industry. Outside the conference room, employees gathered, trying to catch snippets of the conversation. Word spread quickly through the building. This wasn't about punishment or publicity. This was about progress. A senior flight attendant who had been invited to observe the meeting wiped tears from her eyes. In 30 years of flying, she whispered to her colleague, "I've never seen anyone turn discrimination into such a powerful force for change." As the meeting continued, news helicopters circled the building and social media buzzed with anticipation. But inside that conference room, something remarkable was happening. An incident of bias was being transformed into a blueprint for industry-wide transformation. 6 months later, the same LaGuardia Airport terminal looked very different. A large crowd had gathered, but this time it wasn't because of discrimination. It was for the official launch of the Aviation Equality Initiative. Banners hung from the ceiling, and airline staff from various companies mingled with the public. The tech billionaire stood at a podium, but he wasn't alone. Next to him stood the gate agent who had denied him boarding that fateful day. She wasn't there to be shamed. She was there as one of the program's most passionate advocates. "6 months ago, I made a mistake," she began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "But instead of losing my job, I was given the chance to be part of the solution." The crowd listened intently as she explained her journey from that difficult morning to becoming a lead trainer in the new bias awareness program. The tech billionaire stepped up to speak next. "Change doesn't always come from comfort," he said, looking around at the gathered crowd. "Sometimes it comes from confronting our most uncomfortable moments and choosing to grow from them." He gestured to a wall of screens behind him, displaying real-time data from the new AI system that monitored customer service interactions across all participating airlines. The numbers showed a 70% reduction in reported biased incidents since the program's soft launch. A young girl in the crowd raised her hand. "My mom says you could have just sued the airline and gotten lots of money. Why did you choose to help them instead?" The tech billionaire smiled warmly. "Because real change doesn't come from punishment. It comes from transformation. We didn't just want to fix one incident. We wanted to prevent thousands of future incidents." The airline's CEO stepped forward to share some numbers. Over 50,000 airline staff had completed the new training program. The anonymous reporting system had already helped identify and address hundreds of potential bias situations before they escalated. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. But the most powerful moment came when they opened the floor to stories. One by one, people stepped up to share how the initiative had affected them. A flight attendant talked about feeling empowered to speak up. A passenger shared how different their latest flight experience felt. A pilot described the pride of working for an airline that was leading the way in equality. The original gate agent stepped up again, this time with tears in her eyes. "Last week, I helped train staff at another airport," she said. "I told them my story. How one moment of bias turned into an opportunity for growth. And you know what? They listened. Really listened." The tech billionaire then revealed the initiative's next phase, expanding the program to train security personnel, customs officers, and airport staff across the country. His company had committed an additional $200 million to support the expansion. But the real success isn't in the numbers, he said, his voice filled with conviction. It's in the stories we're no longer hearing, the stories of discrimination that aren't happening because we chose to change. A reporter raised her hand. Did you ever imagine that being denied boarding would lead to all this? The tech billionaire looked thoughtful. Sometimes life's worst moments become doorways to its greatest achievements. We took a moment of discrimination and turned it into a movement for change. As the ceremony concluded, the tech billionaire and the gate agent turned trainer stood together for photos. Behind them, a new sign hung in the terminal. Everyone's journey matters. Everyone belongs here. A mother in the crowd whispered to her son, "See, that's how you change the world, not by fighting fire with fire, but by turning obstacles into opportunities." The day ended with the announcement that the program would be adopted by airports in other countries, turning a single incident at one airport into a global movement for change. The tech billionaire's final words resonated through the terminal. This isn't the end of our journey. It's just the beginning of making sure everyone's journey is treated with equal respect.